It's what Palestinians remember as al-Nakba, the catastrophe, when over 725,000 Palestinians were driven out. They are now in diaspora. Over 400 villages were destroyed. And some of the terrorist organizations who were responsible for driving people out at that time were the Irgun and the Stern Gang. The Irgun was responsible for the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946, designed to get the British out. The Zionists wanted the British out of the British Mandate of Palestine. It is important to note, I think, that the White House Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, his father was a member of the Irgun. Israel is today our colonial military outpost so that we can exert military influence over the resources of Western Asia. If you just think about the term the Middle East, the Far East, this is relative to the Western imperialist powers. So it's actually the Arab world and the colonial state of Israel. The apartheid state survives only with United States military, economic, and political support, and therein lies our role in it. Now, the Zionist movement, if you look at Israel, the Zionists have invaded and occupied historic Palestine, invaded and occupied the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt in 1967. They had to give it back. Invaded and occupied the Golan Heights of Syria in 1967. Golan Heights remain occupied. Invaded and occupied southern Lebanon twice. They got kicked out in 2000. They tried again in 2006 and got pushed back. So if there is concern for Israel's neighbors of self-defense, it's understandable. Also, on June 7th, 1981, the Israelis bombed Iraq. They targeted a nuclear facility. They were just in the early stages of developing weapons, or nuclear technology, ultimately for weapons, but bombed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, why would Iraq be seeking a nuclear facility? Why would Iran be seeking a nuclear facility? Because Israel, which has invaded and occupied its neighbors, has between 200 and 400 nuclear weapons. If we want to talk about nuclear non-proliferation, look for the one in the neighborhood who's been attacking its neighbors and is armed to the hilt. So a lot of my colleagues, I was still working in medicine at the time, you would think these, my colleagues and myself would be very educated, at least book smart, and they said, why do they hate us? Now, many people were asking that. Maybe it's elitist of me to expect more from my colleagues. Why do they hate us? Well, I don't know what happened on that day. I don't know who orchestrated everything. But they hate us because we're not spreading democracy and freedom, though we say we do as a cover for what we're doing. But the reality is that we've been killing innocent people for a long, long time. Dead children bothers people a lot. And because to most of the world today, we are the terrorists. If you have the opportunity to travel abroad, ask people what they think of Americans today. So, occupation of Iraq as an extension of the occupation of Palestine. Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now, it was initially called Operation Iraqi Liberation, but the acronym was OIL, so they had to change that. That was bad PR. I can't make that up. That's in a press briefing by Ari Fleischer, I think. As I see it, it was like a perfect storm of interests. The oil interests and the Zionist neoconservatives. Now, not exclusively, but these were two major forces. Of course, oil interests, we know the long history of the Bush family in the oil industry, Dick Cheney and Halliburton, Condoleezza Rice and Zalmay Khalilzad were both working for Chevron. Zalmay Khalilzad became the US ambassador to Afghanistan after we invaded Afghanistan, then became the US ambassador to Iraq, which, as if the Iraqis don't resent us enough, you know, we could have at least picked someone who speaks Arabic, but then qualified to be the US ambassador to the UN. But their on their resume for what got them their job is Khalilzad worked for Unocal, which had ties to Chevron. Now, the neoconservatives, the group that was advising Bush, included individuals like Richard Pearl, who was chairman of the Defense Policy Board, a 30-member board that advises on defense policy, a third of its members got huge industries that they were tied to, corporations in the defense industry, got huge contracts once we invaded. Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, both undersecretaries of defense. Douglas Feith was the highest-ranking civilian in the Pentagon, and David Wormser, who was special assistant at the State Department. Now, I've highlighted Pearl, Feith, and Wormser because back in 1996, they wrote a position paper for their boss, and it was called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm. And what they called for were three major objectives. Number one, cutting off peace talks with Yasser Arafat. This is 1996. Number two, launching military assaults on the occupied territories of Palestine. And number three, get rid of Saddam Hussein. Now, who were Pearl, Feith, and Wormser working for in 1996? Then and current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So high-ranking members of the Israeli administration with a certain policy agenda became high-ranking members of the Bush administration, advising and shaping our foreign policy. Netanyahu is at the top of your screen, then Ehud Olmert, Ariel Sharon, and Shimon Peres. You never see any Ethiopian Jews in the high-ranking members of Israel. Now here's a name this audience will recognize, Philip Zelikow, one of the neocons in the Bush administration. And he said in September of 2002, "Why would Iraq attack America or use nuclear weapons against us? I'll tell you what I think the real threat is and actually has been since 1990. It's the threat against Israel. The American government doesn't want to lean too hard on it rhetorically because it is not a popular sell." No, but we were attacked on September 11th, and we wanted to avenge what happened, and we wanted to launch a war on terror, and we want to save other people and bring them democracy and freedom. That's a much better pitch than this one. Israel and Iraq. Just within the last month, Tony Blair came before the toothless inquiry on Iraq, but at least the British people demanded something. We're a long way from even lip service to asking questions. So this was just several weeks ago, and Tony Blair admitted that Israeli officials influenced and participated in the decisions by the United States and Great Britain to attack Iraq. They were present at meetings with Bush and company in Texas in 2002. So that was a major part of all this. So that's why I'm bringing up Israel, because as a result of, or following 9/11, the story of 9/11 was used as a lie to tie to Iraq, and we invaded Iraq based on lies. All right, joint American-Israeli operations. And this goes to how this affects national security in the United States. The Israelis and Americans are working together in Iraq. This is an article from within months after the invasion that the Israelis, who are quite efficient at death squads, are training them for training Americans to go to Iraq. The IDF has been to Fort Bragg, home of U.S. Special Forces, and Israeli military consultants have visited Iraq. It's still pretty dicey for Israelis to be present in Iraq, so they're just consultants. But what you see is a similarity of tactics: sealing off centers of resistance with razor wire, razing buildings from where attacks have been launched against U.S. troops. These are the same tactics the Israelis use in their occupation. In 2005, America went to the IDF saying, "We need your help. A lot of our soldiers are getting killed with improvised explosive devices." So the U.S. Army maintains frequent and regular contacts with the IDF. American officers travel to Israel for training, and some of the dogs that you've seen in the pictures at Abu Ghraib might be from the IDF's K-9 unit. It's a much shorter trip for them from Israel than from the United States. American crowd control in Iraq, I know from my friend who served as an MP in Nasiriyah: concussion grenades, projectile beanbags, and rubber-coated steel bullets. This is what the Israelis use for crowd control in Palestine. Same tactics, but as you see on your right, a rubber-coated bullet in the brain does just as much damage as one without the rubber coating. This is important. The Israeli Mossad, their secret commando forces, are training Kurdish forces.